Joe Rogan had seen a lot in his life: UFC fighters, world-class athletes, and the toughest minds on the planet. But nothing prepared him for what he saw that evening. An old man, frail and barely able to stand, leaning on two broken sticks as crutches, struggling to take each step. It was the kind of sight most people would ignore, but not Joe. He stopped, he watched, and then he did something that no one saw coming. What happened next would change everything. The streets of downtown Austin were alive that evening, cars rushing by, people lost in their own worlds, their eyes glued to their phones. No one seemed to notice the elderly man struggling with each painful step. His clothes were worn, his hands shaking from age and exhaustion. But it was his eyes that told the real story, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that held a sadness too deep to explain. Joe Rogan wasn't the type to just walk past something like this. He had built his career on curiosity, on asking the right questions, on noticing what others didn't. And something about this man didn't sit right with him. He walked up, keeping his voice calm. "Hey man, you okay?" The old man stopped. His grip on the makeshift crutches tightened. He looked up at Joe, his face lined with years of struggle. Then, in the softest voice, he said 6 words that sent a chill down Joe's spine. "I was never supposed to be here, Pot." Something shifted in the air. Those 6 words weren't just a response. They carried a weight, a hidden truth. He crouched slightly to meet the man's tired gaze. "What do you mean?" The old man exhaled slowly, his breath shaky. He glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. Then he said, "I escaped." Joe's mind raced. Escaped? From what? From where? The man's fingers trembled as he gestured to his legs. "I was supposed to die in there. They never expected me to make it out." Joe's instincts, honed from years of interviews and deep conversations, told him one thing. This man wasn't lying. He wasn't just some homeless guy with a story. This was real. "In where?" Joe asked, his voice lower now. The old man's lips pressed together. He hesitated, then finally spoke. "A place no one knows about. A place where they keep people and never let them leave." Joe felt the hairs on his arms rise. This wasn't just a man with broken crutches. This was a man with a secret that could change everything. Asterisked. Joe's mind was running a mile a minute. He had heard wild stories before, conspiracies, government cover-ups, underground organizations, but there was something about this old man's voice, his eyes, that made it all feel disturbingly real. He had 2 choices: walk away like everyone else had, or push for the truth. He chose the second. Joe gestured to a nearby bench. "Come sit down. Tell me everything." The old man hesitated, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to grab him at any moment. But something in Joe's voice reassured him. He hobbled over and sat with a deep, painful sigh. Joe leaned in. "Start from the beginning." The man rubbed his hands together, gathering his thoughts. Then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, he said, "My name is Daniel, and for the last 35 years I was locked away in a facility that doesn't exist." Joe's chest tightened. Daniel continued, "It's underground, no windows, no names, just numbers. They took me when I was 27. I don't even know if my family ever knew what happened to me." Joe narrowed his eyes. "Who took you?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He looked around again, then leaned in. "I don't know exactly who they were, but they had government badges, security clearances. They weren't just some random group. They had power." Joe felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard whispers about black sites, places where people vanished without a trace. But this was the first time he had met someone claiming to have survived one. "Why did they take you?" Joe asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and I wasn't the only one." Joe's pulse quickened. Who else was there? Daniel's hands started to shake. Other men, women, some young, some old. All of us disappeared without a trace. No trials, no explanations, just dawn. Joe sat back, exhaling sharply. If this was true, it was bigger than anything he had ever heard before. But one question still lingered. How did you escape? Daniel's expression darkened. He glanced down at his makeshift crutches. His voice dropped even lower. Because someone on the inside let me go, but not before telling me one last thing. Joe leaned in. What did they say? Daniel's lips parted, his voice barely audible. They said, I wasn't supposed to survive. A deep silence settled between them. Then Daniel whispered, and if they find out I did, they'll kill me. And now that I've told you, you're in danger too. Joe's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a story. This was a warning. Joe's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He wasn't easily rattled, but this was different. Daniel's eyes darted around again. His voice was almost trembling now. I shouldn't have told you. You need to forget this ever happened. Joe shook his head. No. If what you're saying is true, people need to know. You can't just disappear for 35 years and have no one ask questions. Daniel swallowed hard. You don't understand. They don't let people ask questions, they erase them. Joe sat there for a moment, staring at the frail man in front of him. The story was insane, but deep down something told him it wasn't just paranoia. This man had seen something real. Before Joe could respond, Daniel flinched. His whole body stiffened. Joe followed his gaze. Across the street a black SUV had pulled up. Tinted windows, no license plate. Daniel's face drained of color. His fingers dug into Joe's arm. His voice was barely a breath. They found me. Joe stood up instinctively, his adrenaline spiking. The SUV's engine rumbled. The back door opened slightly. Dan gripped his crutches trying to move. His voice cracked. I have to go. Joe grabbed his arm. Where? You can barely walk. Daniel shook his head. His face was full of something Joe hadn't seen before. Pure terror. Joe, if they take me again I don't come back. Joe clenched his jaw. His mind was racing. What do I do? Then in a split-second decision, he pulled off his hoodie, shoved it into Daniel's hands and whispered, take this, disappear, now. Daniel hesitated. Joe hissed. Daniel nodded once, then turned and hobbled toward an alleyway. His movements were slow, painful, but determined. Joe stood his ground watching the SUV. The back door shut. The engine revved and then just as quickly as it arrived, it pulled away. Joe exhaled sharply. His hands were clenched into fists. Daniel was gone. And Joe knew this wasn't over, because now they knew his face too. Bolted Joe. Rogan had faced a lot in his life. Fighters, politicians, conspiracy theorists. But this was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted in his world. That SUV, the way Daniel reacted, it wasn't just paranoia. Someone was watching, someone was listening, and now they knew he was involved. Joe checked over his shoulder as he walked back to his car. His instincts, the same one that had kept him sharp in countless interviews and debates, were screaming at him. Something was off. He slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel. His mind was racing. Who was Daniel running from? What did he see that made them erase him for 35 years? And more importantly, what happens now that Joe knows? He reached for his phone. Maybe he should call someone. A lawyer, a journalist, someone who could help him figure this out before it got worse. But before he could dial, his screen lit up with a notification. Known number. Be careful who you talk to, Joe. His breath caught in his throat. Then another message. Some things are better left alone. Joe's eyes scanned the street. The SUV was gone, but that didn't mean they weren't still watching. His fingers hovered over the phone screen. He had two choices: forget it ever happened, or dig deeper and risk everything. Joe Rogan wasn't the type to walk away from the truth, so he took a deep breath and hit record. If anything happens to me, this is why. He had heard crazy stories before, but this was something else. He saved the video to a secure folder. If anything happened, people would find it. Then he took a deep breath and did what he always did when something didn't add up. He started asking questions. Joe pulled out his laptop, opened a private browser, and started searching. Missing persons, black site prisons, government disappearances. At first nothing, just old conspiracy theories, blog posts, with no real proof. But then something caught his eye. An old forum thread from over a decade ago. The title, "They Took My Brother. Please help me find him." Joe clicked. The post was from 2012. A woman named Emily had written about her brother Daniel Carter. Joe's blood ran cold. The post detailed how Daniel had vanished in 1987. No records, no evidence, no investigation. The police had brushed it off, saying he had probably just left town. But Emily never stopped looking. And here's where things got really strange. Several users had replied, saying their own family members had disappeared under similar circumstances. No crime scenes, no bodies, just gone. Joe scrolled faster, his gut tightening. Some users had even posted coordinates, locations where their loved ones were last seen. And one of those locations was less than an hour from where Joe had just met Daniel. His heart pounded. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some old man with a wild story. Daniel Carter was real. His disappearance was real. And now Joe had proof that he wasn't the only one. He grabbed his keys. He had one choice left: find out what was really happening before it found him first. Joe drove like a man on a mission, his foot heavy on the gas pedal. The sun had set, and the night wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. The coordinates he found on the forum were now burning a hole in his mind. Every instinct he had told him, this was the moment. He was about to uncover something bigger than he ever could have imagined. The small town he arrived in seemed quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find secrets buried deep beneath the surface. Joe's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the abandoned buildings and long-forgotten streets. His hands gripped the wheel tighter as he neared the area the coordinates pointed to, a rundown warehouse near the edge of town. He parked his car a block away, not wanting to draw attention. The air was thick with tension, and his breath came out in quick bursts. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but his gut told him it wouldn't be good. He grabbed his flashlight and quietly walked toward the warehouse. The windows were boarded up, the door was locked, but the chains were loose. Whoever owned this place had given up long ago. With a soft push, the door creaked open. The darkness inside swallowed him whole. His flashlight flicked on, revealing a wide, empty space with piles of old equipment, forgotten crates, and rusted machinery. But something was off. The warehouse smelled of mildew and dust, but underneath that, something else. Joe stepped further in, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Then he stopped. There in the corner, half covered by a pile of old tarps, was something that didn't belong. A steel door. It wasn't part of the warehouse's original design. There were no windows, no handles, just a door embedded into the floor. Joe felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He approached it cautiously, his mind racing. What could this be? What was behind this door? He knelt down and tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. His heart was pounding now. He wasn't just uncovering a story, he was getting closer to something that could shatter everything. Then he noticed a small latch on the side. With a quick motion, he flipped it open, and the door creaked as it began to lift. The light from his flashlight barely reached the bottom, but there was something down there, something he couldn't quite make out. Joe swallowed hard. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next, and then he stepped down. As he descended into the dark space below, the air grew heavier, colder, and the ground beneath him became solid concrete. The beam of his flashlight landed on something that made his blood run cold. A row of cages. Each one was empty, but the remnants of what had been there were unmistakable. Bloodstains, torn clothing, items that didn't belong. Joe's throat tightened. His mind was reeling. What kind of place was this? Who had been kept here? And why? Then his flashlight flickered, and that's when he saw it. At the far end of the room, a single figure stood. The man looked almost like Daniel, but different. He was gaunt, His clothes were tattered, his face hollow, his eyes were wild with fear. Joe froze, unsure whether this man was a survivor, or something worse. The man's voice cracked as he spoke, barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." Joe's pulse quickened. "What is this place? Who are you?" The man's eyes darted around the room, as if he was afraid of being watched. "You don't understand. They're watching. They always watch. They take people, Joe. They take them and they don't let them leave." Joe's voice was steady. "Who is they? Why are they doing this?" The man shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "I don't know, but I'm the last one left. You have to go. Get out of here before." Suddenly a loud bang echoed from above. Joe spun around. The sound of footsteps. Heavy, fast. Someone was coming. The man grabbed Joe's arm. "Run, now." Without thinking, Joe turned and bolted back to the ladder, climbing as fast as he could. His heart was racing, his breath coming in ragged bursts. But as he reached the top and swung the door open, it was too late. A group of figures stood in the doorway, their faces hidden in shadow, but the glint of something metallic in their hands told Joe everything he needed to know. They were armed, they were prepared, and they weren't about to let him leave alive. Joe's mind raced. There was no time to think. His instincts took over. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the swing of a bat. He scrambled to his feet and dove toward the side, knocking over crates to slow his pursuers. He heard them shout, the sound of footsteps getting closer. Joe grabbed his phone, ready to call for help, but his screen flickered and died. The signal was cut. He was alone. As the figures closed in, one of them stepped forward, his voice low and chilling. "You shouldn't have dug this deep, Joe. Now you're part of the story too." Joe didn't wait to hear more. He darted toward the exit, barely managing to break through the door before it slammed shut behind him. But as he ran into the night, one question kept pounding in his head. What kind of story had he just become a part of? Asterisked. Joe's heart was hammering in his chest as he sprinted down the deserted street, the heavy footsteps of his pursuers echoing behind him. They were close. He could feel it. The figures from the warehouse, the cold glint of metal, all of it was real. He wasn't just facing some underground conspiracy anymore. He was in it. As he ran, his mind raced. What did they want with him? Why had they gone to such lengths to erase the people they took? His phone was dead. His car was too far away. There was no escape, not unless he got out of this town. Joe turned a corner and found himself in a dark alley, his breaths ragged. He slowed down for a moment to catch his breath and assess the situation. He heard the footsteps again, this time even closer. There was no way he could outrun them. Not in this state. Not now. He ducked into the shadows and pressed his back against the cold brick wall, holding his breath. His only hope was to hide, to wait until they passed. But that was becoming less and less likely. And then, just as he thought he heard them rounding the corner, a voice from the darkness made him free. "Joe Rogan." Joe tensed, slowly turning his head. In the alley, a man stood, tall, thin. His face was hidden by a hood, but his voice was unmistakable. "Who are you?" Joe asked, his voice low, defensive. He was prepared to fight if it came to that. The man stepped forward, the sound of his footsteps deliberate and calm. "My name's Marcus, and I think it's time you knew the truth." Joe eyed him warily. "The truth about what?" Marcus smiled grimly. "About the people who've been controlling everything. About the people who took you to that warehouse." Joe's breath caught. He knew who they were, the same figures who had been shadowing him, trying to keep him from digging too deep. "They're not just a rogue group," Marcus continued. "They're part of something much bigger, a global operation that has existed for decades. They've been taking people, erasing their memories, controlling their lives for years. But you, Joe, you're different." Joe's mind spun. "What do you mean, I'm different?" Marcus took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because you found out, and now, you're part of it. You're part of the story that no one was supposed to know. They were never supposed to let you get this far." Joe felt a chill run down his spine. He took a step back. "You've been following me this whole time. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Marcus looked at him with a sad expression. Because I couldn't trust you, Joe. You have a platform. People listen to you. If I told you too soon, they would have silenced both of us before we could get anywhere. Joe clenched his fists. So now what? What do you want from me? Marcus sighed. I want to make sure you understand what you're up against, what they're capable of. These people, they don't care about right or wrong. They don't care about justice. They care about control, about power. Joe's mind was reeling. He felt like everything he knew was being turned upside down. He had thought he was just investigating a conspiracy, but now, it was something far more dangerous. Marcus spoke again, his voice urgent. I'm here to help you, but we have to act fast. They're coming for you now, Joe, and they won't stop until you're gone. You need to get out of town. You need to disappear before they get their hands on you. Joe shook his head. Where do I go? What do I do? Marcus looked him in the eye. There's a place. It's hidden, a safe house, but we have to move now. Before Joe could respond, he heard the unmistakable sound of the black SUV's engine in the distance. It was getting closer. Marcus grabbed Joe by the arm and pulled him into the shadows of the alley. We don't have time. Let's go. Joe's instincts kicked in. He had no choice but to trust this man, who claimed to have answers, and right now, he needed answers more than anything. As they ran through the narrow alleyways, Joe's mind kept racing. Who were these people? What was their true objective? And why had they been watching him so closely? After what seemed like an eternity, Marcus led Joe to an old van parked behind a warehouse. The back door was open, and they quickly climbed inside. The van was already moving by the time Joe had even realized it. Where are we going? Joe asked, his voice tense. Marcus didn't answer right away. He just stared ahead, his expression grim. Finally he spoke, his voice low and serious. There's a facility, Joe, a place where they keep all their records, all their files. We're going there. If we can get inside, we can find out everything. Everything they've been hiding. Joe's heart pounded. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The truth was within reach, but he also knew that whatever they found would change everything. It was now or never. The van sped through the night, the city lights flickering as they passed, and as Joe looked out the window, a question burned in his mind. Was he prepared for the truth? In just a few hours, everything he thought he knew would be shattered, but there was no turning back now. He was already in too deep. They were heading straight for the heart of it all, and nothing would ever be the same again. Every answer seemed to lead to another question, and he was starting to feel like he was getting caught in a web too complex to escape. Marcus sat across from him, his face set in grim determination. The weight of what they were about to do hung in the air between them. There was no going back. The van finally came to a halt. Marcus didn't speak for a moment. Joe, still trying to process everything, stared at the warehouse in front of them. It looked abandoned, like all the others they'd seen, but there was something different about this one. It felt alive. Is this it? Joe asked, his voice tight. Marcus nodded. This is where it all started. They call it the vault. It's where they keep everything. Every name, every record, every person they've erased. If we're going to uncover the truth, we need to go inside. Joe's throat tightened. He had no idea what they were about to find, but he knew it was the only way to stop whatever had been set in motion. The two men exited the van and crouched low, moving toward a side door. It was locked, but Marcus had a set of tools with him and quickly went to work. As the lock clicked open, Joe's heart seemed to skip a beat. This was it, the moment everything could change. They slipped inside, and the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and metal. The building felt like a ghost of its former self, but the deeper they went, the more Joe felt like something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for them. Marcus led the way, his movements deliberate. Joe followed closely, his eyes scanning the darkness. The deeper they went, the more it became clear that this place wasn't just a storage facility. It was a graveyard. The hallway narrowed, and they came upon a door marked Records Room. Marcus hesitated. This is it. The answers are in there. Joe nodded, trying to steady his breath. He couldn't let fear take over now. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. Marcus pulled out a key card, swiping it across the door's sensor with a soft beep. The door unlocked. Inside, rows upon rows of file cabinets stretched out before them. But it wasn't just the records that caught Joe's eye. There were screens on the far wall, monitors showing surveillance footage from different locations. But it wasn't just random footage. Joe recognized some of the faces. People he'd seen before. People from the forum. People like Daniel. His mind reeled. "What is this place?" he whispered. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He moved to one of the cabinets, pulling out a thick folder. When he opened it, Joe could see names, pictures, dates, a list of disappearances. "These are the people they've erased," Marcus said, his voice low. "And if we dig deeper, we'll find more. More about their operations, who they really are, what they're doing." Joe's heart sank as he skimmed through the papers. The names, the dates, they were all connected by one thing: they had all been taken without a trace. But it wasn't just the names that got to him. It was the government officials, the high-profile individuals, even scientists and engineers on the list. Why? Why take all these people? Joe asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus looked at him, his eyes dark with regret. "Because they're trying to control the future. They use people with knowledge, power, influence, and they erase them. They wipe their memories and make them disappear, then use them for their own purposes." Joe felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. This wasn't just a rogue operation. It was a global conspiracy, a network that reached into the highest levels of power. But there was something else, something even more chilling. "They've been working on something bigger," Marcus continued, "something that could change the world. If they succeed, we might never know what really happened." Joe's mind spun. What are they trying to do? Marcus hesitated, looking away. "It's not just about control anymore, Joe. They're trying to erase history, rewrite it so they can create the future they want. And once they succeed, they'll have absolute power. Nothing will stand in their way." Joe clenched his fists, his stomach churning with anger. The world he thought he knew, the truth, the freedom, the power of knowledge, was all at risk. And now, he was the key to stopping it. Before he could respond, a sound broke through the silence. A door opening. Heavy footsteps. They weren't alone. Joe turned sharply, his pulse rising. Marcus's expression hardened. "They found us." Joe didn't need to ask who. He knew it was them, the ones who had been watching, the ones who had taken Daniel, the ones who were determined to keep this secret buried. Marcus grabbed a few files, stuffing them into a bag. "We need to go, now." But just as they turned to leave, a voice echoed from the doorway. "You shouldn't have come here." Joe's blood ran cold as he recognized the voice. It was one of the figures from the warehouse, the same man who had warned him to stop digging. Marcus turned to face him, his eyes narrowing. "You're too late. It's already out." The man stepped forward, his face now fully visible. It was a face Joe recognized from the surveillance footage. A high-ranking official, someone with ties to the government, to organizations he never thought would be involved. "You don't understand what you're playing with, Marcus," the man said, his voice cold and emotionless. "This is bigger than you, bigger than Joe, bigger than anyone. This is the future, and no one can stop it." Joe's eyes flicked to Marcus. He could see the determination in his face. They weren't giving up. "Not now. We're going to stop it," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. The man smiled darkly. "Then you'll have to go through me." And just like that, the standoff began. The air crackled with tension, and Joe knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. He wasn't just uncovering a story anymore. He was part of something far more dangerous, and he was determined to see it through. The truth was out, but the battle for it was just beginning. Dead. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm on the horizon, ready to burst. Joe's eyes locked onto the man standing in front of him, his body tense with the realization that this was no longer just a fight for the truth. It was a fight for survival. The figure, his face as cold as ice, stepped forward. "You really think you can stop this?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think your little investigation means anything?" The system is bigger than you, Joe. It's been in place for decades. You've already seen the tip of the iceberg. Joe's heart pounded, his mind racing. Every instinct told him this man wasn't just some hired muscle. He was part of the power structure, someone who had been behind the scenes for years, pulling the strings of everything. This was it, the final hurdle. Marcus stood beside him, his jaw clenched. We're not going to let you erase everything. Not this time. The man's smile was chilling. Erase? No, Marcus, we're not erasing anything. We're building something new. A new world, one where control is the foundation, where power is absolute, and no one will ever be able to disrupt it again. Joe's blood ran cold as the weight of the man's words settled in. He wasn't just talking about secrets, he was talking about something far worse. A new world order, one that could change everything, forever. But Joe wasn't backing down, not after everything he had learned. You're wrong, Joe said, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. People deserve the truth. They deserve to know what you've been hiding. The man's eyes narrowed. Truth. The truth is for the weak, Joe. People don't want the truth. They want stability. They want safety. And that's what we're offering them. Joe took a step forward, his fists clenched. You're controlling them. You're taking their freedom, their memories, their lives. Marcus joined him, his voice low but fierce. And we're going to stop it. The man laughed, a dark, hollow sound. You can't stop what you don't understand. You're playing checkers while we're playing chess. You think a few files and a dead man's testimony are going to make a difference. You think the world will just stop turning because you found out. You're nothing but pawns. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Joe's mind raced, piecing together everything he had learned, everything he had uncovered. And then the truth hit him. They weren't just controlling people's lives. They were controlling history itself. The people they erased, the people they took. They were part of a plan to reshape reality, to rewrite the past and bend the future to their will. And Joe, in that moment, realized something crucial. Maybe we're pawns, Joe said, his voice calm, but the game's not over yet. The man's smile faltered, and for the first time Joe saw a flicker of uncertainty. The door slammed open behind them, and another figure entered the room. This time it was Daniel. His eyes were wide with shock as he looked at Joe and Marcus, but there was something different in the way he held himself now. The fire in his eyes had returned. What the hell's going on? Daniel asked, his voice thick with confusion. Marcus turned to him, his voice urgent. We're about to expose everything. The truth is right here. Daniel's eyes flicked to the man standing in front of them, the one who had been so sure of himself moments before. He didn't speak, but Joe could see the understanding between them. This was the man who had been behind it all. Without warning, Daniel lunged forward, grabbing a piece of metal from the nearby desk and swinging it toward the man. The impact sent the man stumbling back, crashing into a stack of records. Joe didn't hesitate. He charged forward, grabbing the files that had fallen to the floor. As he did, he noticed something among the scattered papers, a name. The name was familiar. It was his own. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly scanned the document. There it was, clear as day. Joe Rogan. The file contained a list of every person Joe had ever interviewed, every person he had ever helped, and even his own personal history. His entire life was being controlled, monitored, altered, erased. Marcus looked over his shoulder, his face pale. Joe, it's happening. You're a part of their experiment. You always have been. Joe's stomach dropped. He had suspected it. He had felt it all along. The strange coincidences, the strange sense of being watched. But now it was confirmed. He wasn't just the investigator. He was a subject of their control. As the man recovered, rage burning in his eyes, he lunged toward Joe. You don't know what you've done, you fool. The man snarled. You've just exposed everything. You'll never be able to stop us now. But Joe didn't back down. He couldn't afford to. His entire life had been part of this web, and now he was going to bring it all to light. With one final push, Joe grabbed the nearest file, slamming it into the man's chest. I don't need to stop you alone. The world is waking up, and the truth is going to burn everything you've built to the ground. The man's face twisted in fury, but before he could respond, the sound of sirens rang in the distance. "It's over," Joe said, stepping back. The man's eyes flashed with panic. He turned, reaching for something on the table, but it was too late. The police arrived just as the man was about to make his final move. The entire operation, the web of lies, was falling apart. As the authorities moved in, arresting everyone in the room, Joe looked at Marcus. "We did it." Marcus gave a grim nod, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of uncertainty. "This isn't the end, Joe. They're still out there. The people in charge of all of this. They won't stop." Joe shook his head. "No, Marcus. We'll stop them. The truth is out now. It's not just about us anymore. It's about everyone. The world knows what's going on, and they won't let it continue." Joe looked down at the files in his hands. The battle had been won, but the war, it was far from over. The world had just started to wake up to the truth, and Joe Rogan was going to make sure it stayed awake. The lights of the police cars flickered in the distance, as the last of the men were led out in handcuffs. Joe stood there, breathing heavily, his mind already shifting toward the next step. The fight for truth had only just begun. This was just the beginning, but Joe had a new purpose now. He wasn't just investigating the truth, he was fighting for it. The world had changed, but Joe felt like he had barely scratched the surface. The flashing lights of the police cars were slowly fading into the distance, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on his shoulders. The truth was out there now, but Joe knew the battle was far from over. Marcus was beside him, both of them standing in the same room where everything had gone down. The authorities had already started to clean up, arresting the key figures, and yet the damage was done. The secret was no longer contained, but who would take the fall? Would the world even believe the truth? Joe couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. The system they had uncovered, the hidden force manipulating everything, had too many layers. Just because they exposed a few of them didn't mean the rest of it would crumble. "Do you think we've won, Joe?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice a mix of doubt and hope. Joe looked over at him, taking in the exhaustion in his friend's eyes. "I don't know, man. This isn't about us anymore. It's about everyone. The world has to wake up, and it's not going to be easy." Marcus nodded slowly. "We exposed the truth, but how many people will actually believe it? This goes against everything they've known. They've been living a lie for so long." Joe took a deep breath, his mind replaying the events, the files, the names, the faces of those they had seen vanish from existence. It wasn't just a conspiracy anymore. It was a global manipulation that affected every aspect of life. "They will believe it," Joe said, determination in his voice. "It won't be easy, but they'll see it. They have to. We have to make sure of that." The air felt heavy, like the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing down. Joe knew what needed to be done. He couldn't walk away from this. "There's one thing we have to do first," Joe said, looking over at Marcus. "We need to go public. Everything we found, we need to get it out there, before they can cover it up again." Marcus hesitated. "You're right, but you know what this means, right? If we put it all out there, we're going to be targets. We're going to be enemies of the state." Joe's gaze hardened. "I know, but it's the only way. The truth needs to be heard. If we don't do this now, we'll never be able to stop them. They'll just continue with their plans." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "And how do you propose we get this out? We've got evidence, but we've seen how they handle that. They control the media, the narrative. They'll find a way to discredit us." Joe thought about it for a moment, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. There was only one way to do this, one way to break through the media's grip on the narrative. "We take it straight to the people," Joe said. "We're going to use every platform we can to expose what we found. Social media, podcasts, live streams. We go direct. We don't wait for anyone's approval. We don't ask for permission." Marcus's eyes widened. "You're talking about going viral, but how do we make sure it gets to the people who matter? The ones who can do something about it?" Joe's lips curled into a confident smile. We make sure it spreads like wildfire. We use every tool at our disposal, and we make the noise loud enough that they can't ignore it. He knew it was risky, but it was their only option. They couldn't wait for some perfect moment. The truth had to be released now. They spent the next few days gathering everything they could: files, footage, photos, the names, the records, and they started piecing it all together into a format that was ready to go public. They reached out to people they trusted, people with influence, those who could help amplify their message. The time for secrets was over. As Joe sat in front of his computer, preparing to hit send, his heart raced. This was the moment everything changed. If he did this, there would be no going back. His life would never be the same again. But he knew this was the right thing to do. There was no turning back. He clicked the button. The video went live. The title was simple but explosive: "The Truth About the System That Controls Us All." Joe's face appeared on screen, and his voice carried the weight of everything he had uncovered. He spoke directly to the camera, explaining the web of lies, the manipulation, the control, the global conspiracy that had been in place for decades. He named names, showed evidence, and gave the world a glimpse of the truth. He wasn't alone. Marcus stood beside him, his own voice joining in, confirming the authenticity of the information. They spoke with a quiet urgency, knowing that this could change everything, or it could get them killed. The video was just the beginning. They shared it on every social media platform, on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. They reached out to influencers, journalists, and activists. They used every tool they could find to make sure the message reached the masses. The reactions were immediate and overwhelming. At first there was disbelief. People didn't want to accept what they were hearing. It felt too impossible, too much to comprehend. But then the floodgates opened. A wave of people who had been following Joe for years began to share the video. The hashtags started trending. The news outlets began to pick up the story. Some tried to discredit it, of course, but the truth was too loud to be ignored. The world was waking up. There was no way to stop it now. The truth had been set free, and the fight for control had begun. But it wasn't just the people who were taking notice. The powerful forces behind the operation were scrambling to cover their tracks, trying to stop the spread of the truth. But Joe, Marcus, and Daniel weren't going to stop. They knew they were in this for the long haul. The battle was far from over. It wasn't just about revealing secrets anymore. It was about fighting for the freedom of every person whose life had been manipulated. And as Joe sat back, watching the world react to what he had just unleashed, one thing was clear: he had started a movement. And this movement, it wasn't going to stop until the truth was completely uncovered, and the system that controlled the world was torn down, piece by piece. The fight had just begun, but this time, they had the truth on their side. Dialed. The world was changing, and Joe felt the weight of it with every breath. What had started as a single investigation into a seemingly small conspiracy had spiraled into something far bigger, a movement that had taken on a life of its own. His name was now synonymous with truth, with defiance, with the fight against control. But with this new power came new consequences. Joe sat in his studio, his eyes glued to the screen in front of him. The comments were pouring in faster than he could read them, each one more passionate than the last. Some people praised him for his bravery, others questioned his sanity. Some accused him of stirring up chaos for the sake of personal gain. It was the price of truth, he thought. But what hurt the most were the threats. He had expected them, but seeing them written out, seeing the words directed at him, it was a different feeling. "We will make you disappear. You have no idea what you've started. Your time is running out." It wasn't just empty words. Joe knew that. He had seen enough of the world's hidden machinations to understand that when powerful people made threats, they meant it. They had the resources, the networks, the reach, and they weren't going to let some podcaster, some nobody, as they probably saw him, disrupt their carefully crafted plans. Joe leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. There was a heaviness in the air that made his chest tighten. He had been in dangerous situations before. He had faced fear head-on countless times, but this was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who was now learning the truth, about the hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, who were waking up to the conspiracy that had been controlling their lives. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped in. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with the same exhaustion that Joe had been feeling for weeks. "Are you reading these comments?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "Some of these people are taking this way too far. They're not just angry, they're scared." Joe gave a short nod, but his gaze remained fixed on the screen. He didn't need to read every comment. He had seen enough to know how the world was reacting. People were frightened, confused, and angry. The truth was too much to process, and for the powerful people who had been controlling everything for so long, it was a direct threat to everything they had built. "I know," Joe replied. "It's like pulling a thread on a sweater. The whole thing's unraveling, and we're right in the middle of it." Marcus exhaled sharply, and sank into a chair across from Joe. "What's the next step? I mean, we exposed them. The truth's out there. But how do we keep the momentum going? How do we make sure they can't just erase it?" Joe thought for a moment. He knew that exposing the truth was only the first part of the battle. Spreading it, making sure it wasn't silenced by those who controlled the narrative, was the real fight. But it wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about protection. Protecting the people who were sharing this truth, protecting those who had spoken out, and risking everything for the cause. "I don't think we can stop now," Joe said, his voice steady, but with a new edge of determination. "The truth is out. The people who need to hear it already pass. Now we need to make sure it doesn't disappear." He stood up and paced around the room, his mind racing. There were still too many questions, too many people who would want to silence them. They had the truth, but they had to keep moving. They had to fight for it, because without that, the forces behind the conspiracy would simply wait for the storm to pass. "We need to make it bigger," Joe said, his eyes narrowing. "We need to get the truth to more people beyond just the usual platforms. We need to create a movement, something bigger than us, something they can't ignore." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How are we going to do that? I mean, we're not exactly on the good side of the media or the government right now." Joe smiled grimly. "I've been thinking about that. We get ahead of them. We tell the story our way, not through their lenses. The world is already watching, and the more they try to discredit us, the more people will realize there's something they're hiding. We start grassroots, make connections with other people who have been silenced, get the voices of people who have been victimized by this system. We create an army of truth tellers, not just a couple of voices." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether Joe was serious, and then he nodded. "You're right. The more we bring into this, the harder it will be for them to shut it down." They spent the next few weeks in full operation mode. They partnered with activists, journalists, and whistleblowers, anyone who could contribute pieces of the puzzle. Joe took to social media, constantly sharing new bits of information, encouraging people to speak out, and giving them a platform to do so. It wasn't just about breaking the news anymore. It was about building a community of people who knew the truth, who were brave enough to stand up against the system that had tried to suppress it. But the attacks didn't stop. In fact, they intensified. Joe's life was no longer his own. He couldn't go anywhere without looking over his shoulder, wondering who was watching. His personal information was leaked online. People started showing up at his home, strangers accusing him of being a traitor, or worse, a conspirator. And then one night, it all came to a head. Joe had just finished recording a new podcast episode when he heard the knock on his door. At first he thought it was just another reporter, or someone from the press. But when he opened the door, he saw a group of people standing there, their faces hidden in the shadows. Before he could react, they pushed their way inside. Marcus was already standing by the door, ready for trouble, but they were outnumbered. The men who had barged in weren't the type to negotiate. they were the type to silence. Joe barely had time to think before he was grabbed and thrown to the ground. His mind raced, trying to figure out how he could escape, how he could get word out. He knew this could be the end. But then in the chaos, a light flickered. Someone he hadn't seen coming, had shown up to help. It was Daniel. He burst through the door with a crowd of people behind him. The group of attackers froze for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The reinforcements had come. The attackers retreated, leaving Joe on the floor, breathing heavily. He looked up, shocked, but relieved. See Daniel and the others standing there, ready to fight for him. What the hell was that? Joe gasped, struggling to stand. Daniel's face was serious. They're trying to stop us. They're scared, Joe, and they're not going to stop. But we've got more people now. We've got the truth. As Joe processed what had just happened, one thing became clear. The system might have tried to silence him, but he wasn't done yet. The fight was just getting started. The consequences of telling the truth were heavy, but Joe knew now more than ever that he couldn't stop. The world was counting on him, and for the first time in weeks, Joe felt hope. There was still a chance to break the system, to dismantle the control that had shaped everyone's lives. They weren't alone. The people were waking up, and they weren't going back to sleep. The truth would keep them fighting, and Joe Rogan was going to make sure it stayed that way. The truth was out. The battle was growing fiercer by the day, and Joe knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The fight for the freedom of information, for the rights of the people, and for the future of society had only just begun. The forces trying to suppress the truth were powerful, but Joe's resolve was unshakable. But now as the world watched, many waking up, many still in denial, and many unsure of which side to stand on, the question was, what's next? The battle wasn't just Joe's anymore. It was ours. This movement was no longer just about exposing a hidden system of control. It was about the people rising up and demanding to be heard. It was about you taking a stand for what you believe in, even when the odds are stacked against you. Joe knew this wasn't just a fight he could win alone. It wasn't just about spreading the truth. It was about empowering others to take action, to speak out, and to refuse to stay silent in the face of corruption. This was where you come in. The world needs more than just viewers. It needs warriors for truth. If you've seen what Joe has gone through, if you've heard the truth, and felt the weight of it, it's time to act. Share this story. Share it with your friends, your family, your followers. Let the world know what's been kept in the shadows for far too long. If you believe in a world where people aren't controlled by those in power, if you believe in the right to know the truth, you have a role to play in this movement. Don't let this moment slip away. Don't let the truth be buried again. Subscribe, share, speak out, because Joe's fight is only just beginning. But together we can make sure it ends the way it's meant to, with the truth winning. The battle is far from over, but with each person who steps up, the power of truth grows stronger. So what are you going to do? The choice is yours. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss a single update in the fight for truth. Share this video with everyone you know and join the movement. Together we're unstoppable.